So, Clodagh, we haven't done an update in 3 days, but on the Ashling Murphy trial. But I think we'll start with what we heard today, which focused again. The last 3 days, really, a lot of it has focused on what the prosecution says are the admissions that Jozef Puska made while he was in hospital being treated for injuries. And today we heard from Professor Michael Ryan. A good bit of it was about the medication and the drugs he had received while being treated for stomach injuries. He described him being treated with oxycodone, I think it was, which is, did he describe what that drug was?
Yeah, so Professor Michael Ryan was the expert witness that was brought in today to give his opinion on whether or not he thought that there could have been any substances in Jozef Puska's system that could have had any kind of bearing on the admissions that he made to Gardaí. Now, he explained that oxycodone was a painkiller. It's an opioid. He said that in his expert opinion, he did conclude in the end that there was no evidence to support that suggestion. He said that any drugs, including anaesthetic, which was also given to Mr. Puska during surgery, would have been out of his system at that point. It is a painkiller. You can take up to 400 milligrams per day, or can be administered after surgery. However, Jozef Puska, I think, was only administered 10 milligrams, and by the time he came out of surgery, there would have been only a max dose of about 8.25 milligrams of the painkiller in his system.
So in Professor Michael Ryan's opinion, this isn't going to basically lead him to be intoxicated from the drugs in his system. So was he cross-examined about that medical opinion?
He was, yes. So the defence did give him a bit of a cross-examination, and he said that he wasn't a clinical doctor. He accepted rather the suggestion that he wasn't a clinical doctor, nor was he a consultant in emergency medicine.
Yeah, so he obviously he describe how he came to his conclusions? Is obviously going through files that he was presented more than obviously a direct examination of the patient.
Yeah, so he was given extensive medical records from St. James's Hospital, where he had the surgery after his stomach wounds, and it's through combing through those extensively, he came to the conclusions that the painkillers or any other drugs that were administered to Jozef Puska wouldn't have had any bearing on the admissions that he gave to Gardaí on the 14th of January.
Yeah, so because obviously over the Thursday and Friday, although there was various things brought into the court, but a lot of it was discussing what Jozef Puska is said to Gardaí at the time. So just to recap on it, Jozef Puska has obviously pled not guilty to murder, to the murder of Ashling Murphy. He was admitted to hospital, was it on the 13th of
January 2022, yes.
2022. And at that point, we've heard before that he'd had a number of stomach injuries, and that Gardaí had come to speak to him in the hospital, hadn't been able to initially, and then had come back at a certain point when he'd come out of surgery. Now, on Thursday, they brought in Jozef Puska, obviously needed a translator. So we heard from the man who translated him. Now, obviously, we've already heard through the Gardaí, they've already given evidence about what they say Jozef Puska told them. This is obviously sort of to fill out the picture. So his name was Miroslav Sedilek, was it?
Yeah, Miroslav Sedilek. He was the translator who spoke to Gardaí 2 times on the 13th of January. So we heard that there was a phone call at about 12 p.m. and there was a second phone call at about 6 p.m. He described to Gardaí that Mr. Puska was speaking very freely and quite quickly at the time. He said he had to stop him and just slow him down so he could translate to Gardaí. He described Jozef Puska as being in very low spirits, and even said that he was he said he sounded desperate following the confession. Later that evening, he had another conversation with Gardaí where he was asked to explain to Jozef Puska why Gardaí were seizing some of his items through a search warrant.
So the first interview that he translated was kind of to do with these wounds that he suffered, and there wasn't any mention of the Ashling Murphy murder, I think, at that point.
No.
And then he came back at 6 o'clock. Obviously, then there'd been developments, and at that point, the translator, Mr. Sedacek, said he was asked by Jozef Puska, was he a suspect?
Yeah, so Jozef Puska had asked him, am I a suspect in this murder? And the Gardaí explained to Miroslav that he wasn't a suspect, but he was a person of interest. He was asked again if he had any information about what had happened in Tullamore. And asked, of course, did he know about what happened in Tullamore? To which he said that no, he'd only knew something about it from the internet. He also said that the translator said that when Jozef Puska decided to give this so-called confession or make this admission, that it was quite spontaneous. And he said that he was asked, it kind of came out very quickly, it was kind of rushed, but he said that his confession was, Jozef Puska wanted him to translate it accurately, to which he said, I did it, I kill her. And he said that he didn't do it intentionally and apologised for what had happened. And it was at this point as well, Miroslav suggested that, or said that he thought Jozef Puska's voice was trembling, and his sentences were quite disjointed, which is kind of the perspective he was able to give as the Slovakian interpreter that the Gardaí may not have been able to pick up on themselves. And then during cross-examination, he was asked if he had followed the case in the news. He had been asked if he was listening to another podcast on the case, to which he said no. And the reason that they brought this up is because Miroslav had said that there was a significant pause before Jozef Puska had made the confession. And this was something that wasn't in his original statement. However, this is something that other people had said about the confession.
Yeah, presumably the guards who were there also. So then on Friday, there was extensive, I suppose, DNA and fingerprint evidence really taken from both from Mr. Puska and from the bike and other items found at the scene of where Ashling Murphy was killed. So that was probably quite technical evidence, as these things tend to be. But they spoke obviously about DNA was taken from Jozef Puska in the hospital, and this was compared to a number of items at the scene. I think there was 3 items brought up.
Yeah, so there was Dr. Kim Connick, who is from the Forensic Science Ireland fingerprint section. There was 3 items, a navy fleece, an adult mountain bike, and a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses with gold frames. The raincoat, she said, was fleece-lined and rubberized. She said it was a very good quality. There was a heavy stain of blood, looked like a blood-like substance on the outside. She took photographs of this. She visually looked at it for fingerprints, and then she chemically treated it. She said that there was nothing found on this coat. She then took the sunglasses. There was a small amount of mud on the front lens. She took photos and again chemically treated it. She found an area when she kind of visibly looked at it that of possible touch evidence. She then was able to look for fingerprints through that, basically dusting it down, as you often see on television. She dusted it down, and that was kind of her way of chemically treating it. She took this sample from the glasses and sent it to the DNA section, hoping to get a hit from that. She didn't know whether or not they would. There was also the bike that we've seen throughout this case, the green handlebars and the grey body. She took some photographs of this. She said the grips of the handlebars were missing, but she took photographs of the rest of the bike and she treated it chemically again with the fingerprint dust, and she found one mark, and this was on the underside of the saddle. So to get in at it better, she was able to remove the saddle, and she did say it wasn't unusual that the fingerprint was found there. Then we heard from Detective Sergeant Damien Carroll, who is a fingerprint expert on Garda Síochána, and he said that he was the expert that took the fingerprints and palm prints from Jozef Puska. There was 2 sets taken from him, and he was able to match up the second set of fingerprints with the print that was found underneath the saddle. And it was very much so consistent, he said, with the saddle being lifted up in the air. And he explained to the jury as well in detail how you would go about matching fingerprints. You know, they're all unique to each individual person. There's all these different ridges and lines. And he explained to the jury how that would work and how he was able to match that fingerprint on the saddle to Jozef Puska.
Yeah, because obviously the fingerprint evidence now is a couple of 100 years old, and it's probably the precursor to the DNA in that it is a unique thing, and it's been used extensively. We're all used to it from TV. Now, obviously, DNA has become something that's even more prominent in recent years. And we heard from Dr. Lorna Flanagan as well, from Forensic Science Ireland, about the DNA sample that was taken from the items at the scene. Now, she gave very detailed evidence, as is always the case with DNA, but she sort of gave those ratios that always, I suppose, make the headlines for people that don't understand some of the technical evidence. And she came back with a kind of a figure, I think, and also a couple of ways in which it's reached.
Yeah, so she basically, what she did was she worked mainly with the DNA that was underneath Ashling Murphy's fingernails. So she basically, what she did was she separated the DNA, so she was able to pull male DNA from the female DNA. Obviously that female DNA belonging to Ashling Murphy, and then there was the male sample, and she was able to match that again to Jozef Puska. Now she said that the chances of finding this male profile in anyone other than a relative of his was 1 in 14,000. She did explain as well, like those kind of figures of the scale. So 1 in 14,000, I think it goes up to like 1 in 1,000 million, which is a billion. That's kind of the length of the scale. And she said that, to get those kind of specific figures, they would use Ireland's DNA database, but she also had access to a DNA database that would have had information about Slovaks and Roma Slovaks in particular, which is Jozef Puska's ethnicity. And with that, she was able to kind of narrow it down and say that it was 1 in 14,000 chances of belonging to anyone else other than Jozef Puska or a relative. We also heard evidence from a detective, Sergeant David Scahill, who said that he kind of did some he looked at some of the CCTV and was able to pinpoint that two of Jozef Puska's brothers who live here in Ireland, they were nowhere near the scene of the crime. And Lubomir and Marek are their names. And they were kind of seen in and around Tullamore town between 3 o'clock and like 10 to 4. So they were seen in Tullamore town and not near the scene. So that was kind of more evidence given to the jury.
Yeah, so the prosecution is basically saying that those people can be ruled out, and therefore you're looking this really narrowing the probabilities that it could be somebody else. And they also specifically said there's no suggestion any other male relative of Mr. Puska could be a suspect in their opinion.
Exactly.
So then we also heard from DNA expert John Hoard. What was his role and what was he sort of saying?
Yeah, so he works in the Forensic Science Laboratory in DNA analysis, and he again was able to look at the swabs taken from underneath the Ashling Murphy's fingerprints. So the information that Dr. Lorna Flanagan had gotten, he then analysed that. She said that the samples of DNA taken from Jozef Puska at St. James's Hospital matched, again, DNA that was taken from the handlebars of the bike. And with this, we did see that it was 1,000 million times likely to be from Jozef Puska than anyone else. So the chances basically of this DNA belonging to somebody else is 1 in a billion.
Yeah. So there was other Garda witnesses as well brought in, was there, who discussed about a previous suspect that was initially arrested by Gardaí but ultimately ruled out after a period of time. Did they give extensive details of that?
Yeah, so Detective Superintendent Patrick O'Callaghan gave evidence regarding the other suspect who was arrested and released. We'll just call him a Romanian male.
Yeah.
He basically explained that there was 720 lines of inquiry in this case. And he explained to the jury that a line of inquiry is kind of when there is something that needs to be done. So whether it's making a statement, analysing a piece of DNA, identifying the bicycle, taking photographs, all those kind of different things, each of those is a line of inquiry. And one of those was this Romanian male. He was arrested and then released the following day. So he was arrested on the evening of the 12th of January and he was released about 10:30 the following day. So he was interviewed over about 11 hours. Detective Superintendent Patrick O'Callaghan said that during his time in custody, he gave kind of consistent accounts of where he was. His alibi was corroborated by his mother and his grandmother, and it soon became apparent that he wasn't actually involved in the case. His DNA and his handprints were also taken. His hand and fingerprints were also taken, and it returned later that evening on the 13th to say that neither the prints or the DNA matched from the bike matched him or anything on the crime scene.
So at this point then, obviously, Jozef Puska became the focus of the investigation. So the evidence was concluded today. They're not starting again till noon tomorrow. The case begins.
Correct.
We were heading into maybe the final few days of the prosecution's case. Would that be fair to say? Do we know who's coming next?
Yeah, we know there's 2 more witnesses. I'm not exactly sure who those witnesses are. Because the final bit of evidence today was that kind of medical evidence, I'm sure it's only kind of routine evidence that we're going to hear from the final 2 witnesses. I don't think it's going to be anything more significant because it is believed that the prosecution are going to rest their case tomorrow. And then from Thursday, it'll be down to the defence to begin their defence in the case.
Yeah, so I mean, the defence will begin. We don't know the exact what they'll present or what they won't present. So we're probably, we'd certainly, by the end of this week, we'll have a clear picture of how long the case is going to go in. Once the defence rests, then you will get a judge summing up. Could be a half a day, something typically like that. And at that point, standard practice then will be the jury going out. So there's still a while to go in this case anyway, and it's not always clear how long these things go or not. Have there been large crowds still? And
yes, still large crowds. I think the case is going pretty well in terms of there hasn't been many stop start. You can see in other trials sometimes, there's juries that members are ill or one has to leave the trial for whatever reason. But it's been pretty steady and solid. It looks like, there is still a lot of people coming into court. There's still an overflow court in place where even some media still have to sit. And there's a lot of people still in there and in the main court as well, observing. And, you see the same faces coming back daily to keep up with what's going on.
You do, and you have to feel, of course, for the family going in and out every day.
Absolutely.
What can seem like a circus, I suppose. But, it is an open justice system, as we spoke about before.
Absolutely.
That's an essential part of it. Okay, Clodagh, well, we'll definitely come back to it at the end of the week. Presumably, we'll have another pod after maybe the prosecution come to an end.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Clodagh.
Thank you very much, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.